Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. This is your host, Amina Ahmed, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Welcome back to another episode of NextGen, where we speak about the issues that we're facing in our world today, ranging from humanitarian crises, issues across the world, including revolutionary movements that we have covered, the discrimination and racism towards different groups of people. Here in the United States, it was a historic day for us with the inauguration, another peaceful transfer of power. You're watching us on Galaxy 19 satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and Apple TV as well. And today's discussion is focused on Islamophobia in France. We've seen this issue garner international attention because of the hijab as well. And to discuss this further, we have with us Rim-Sarah Alouane, French legal academic and commentator. Rim-Sarah is a PhD candidate in Toulouse, focusing in on religious liberties, civil liberties, constitutional law, and human rights. Her work has been published globally, internationally. She comes on TV and radio, speaking on BBC, Al Jazeera, NPR about human rights and these international and discrimination in France. She speaks here in the United States as well as worldwide. Thank you so much, Rim-Sarah, for being with us today.
Salam alaikum. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it is an honor for us. But Rim-Sarah, I want to ask you, what is secularism in France? For those who might not be of French origin, who might not even be familiar with French politics, what does secularism mean for France?
I'm going to start by quoting a very French famous professor of administrative law who defined laïcité, because I think that's what we are heading to, as a word that smells like powder. Then it's a very explosive word, meaning very, controversial. So I will not translate laïcité with secularism, because for me, they are kind of different. For me, laïcité is a way to implement secularism. To explain you what laïcité is, what you call French secularism, I need to take you back to French history, back in then, when the Catholic Church was really running the country. The idea of laïcité comes from the revolution, this idea that the spiritual and the state must be separated. But it's really in 1882, with what we call the Great Law of Public Education, that the idea came that while the state should remove any religious influence, at that time, the Catholic Church, from public education. And it was replaced with more secular, lectures and curricula. And fast forward to 1905, a very, very important law was adopted in France. It's called the Law of December 1905 on the separation of churches and the state. And funny enough, actually, the word laïcité does not appear, but it was inspired by it. And the idea is quite simple in theory. The idea was that the religious affair should be removed from the state, as in state affairs should not interfere with churches, with religion, and vice versa. The church, so religion, should not interfere with state affairs. And if I want to compare it with just to give you an example, to compare with the United States of America, I believe that America is a laic country as well, but in America, you have what we call the wall of separation between church and state, that Roger Williams, the founder of the state of Rhode Island, created that idea, and it was then used by Thomas Jefferson in his address to the Danbury Baptists. There's this wall of separation, and meaning that state and religion are separated. But the difference with France is that in America, you protect religion from the potential abuses from the state.
Right.
In France, it's the other way around. We try to protect the state and in extenso the people against the potential abuses of the Catholic Church because of our history. And what does that mean? It means that religious neutrality is imposed upon the state, is imposed upon civil servants, because civil servants represent the state, works for the state. Meaning that a civil servant is not allowed to wear any religious signs, whether it's a headscarf or a kippah or a turban or a big cross. However, and it's very important, neutrality, religious neutrality, is not imposed upon the people, upon private individuals. Because the idea is to ensure state neutrality and to protect freedom of conscience and freedom of religion, freedom to believe, to not believe, to change religion, etc., etc. So both ideas like freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, can only be protected if the state is neutral. Which is, again, a great thing. Like everybody is able to express its religious feeling as long as public order is not disturbed. It's in the law. But the problem is, it has been a couple of years now, I would say 20 years maybe, and it has been accelerated 10 years ago. More and more, laicite has been misused, misinterpreted. That's what I call the weaponization of laicite by some politicians, both from the right and the left wing, is being weaponized as a tool for political identity to target religious visibility and especially Muslim visibility. And that's when laicite, like some weaponized religion, we are weaponizing laicite against a certain group of people. And I think that's very dangerous.
So you talk about the weaponization of French secularism, basically, that is happening to demonize the Muslim community. What particular policies and factors are we seeing in France being used to suppress and discriminate against the Muslim community?
It's very tricky. So I have to take you back to 1989, in the 90s. Where, you take the geopolitical context at that time, which was quite hot, still is, international affairs, all the things that has been happening in some countries in the Middle East, as well as North Africa, etc. So all of a sudden, Islam became, a thing. Visible, and this fear, of the Islamization of Europe, the risk of terrorist attacks. So you have all of those myths that has been, that is not new really, but that had expanded, if you want, at that time period. In 1989, we had the first wave of what we call here the headscarf affairs. A couple of girls, students, female students, were expelled from a public school for wearing a headscarf, and on the ground that they were violating laicite. However, like I told you previously, and that's why I insisted on the definitions, religious neutrality is not imposed upon private citizens, but upon the state and teachers, because they are civil servants, but not on students. And a whole national debate started about how religious neutrality, like students should be protected from the abuses of religion. And of course, the hijab more particularly was targeted. And at that time, the government, fast forward a couple of years later, the government, who obviously wanted to pass a law at some point, I take that back, 1989, the government asked for the opinion of our Council of State, which is like the highest, one of the highest court here in France. And they released an opinion, a non-binding opinion, saying that actually, since religious neutrality is, imposed upon the state, students should be allowed to wear a religious sign, a religious garment, as long as public order is not disturbed. So, for example, if I don't know, your jewel or your headscarf or your kippah or whatever, for example, is a danger for your safety or, student safety, then indeed you should remove it. But otherwise, besides that, it doesn't cause any issue, right? And a couple of years later, of course, the government at that time, it was when Jacques Chirac was president, wanted to pass a law to ban religious sign at school. And we had that commission, the Commission Stasi, that released a report on laïcité, which, again, I'm not getting into details here, led to the adoption of the law of 2004 on prohibiting ostentatious religious signs in public school. And the tricky part is, of course, this law is not called law banning the hijab. It would have been discriminatory. All religious signs are affected. Everybody is affected by that law. But the intention behind that law, the intention of lawmakers at that time was really to target the hijab. And the funny thing, during the Stasi Commission, no women wearing a headscarf was even, interviewed, which is an ongoing thing. And ever since, it has been going on all the time. And usually it's Muslim women who are targeted because, well, they are the ones who are mostly visible, and also because of our history with Islam. And the law is made broad enough to apply to everyone. But again, you have to understand the intention. So then we had the prohibition of the full face covering in 2010, even though less than 2,000 women at that time was wearing it in France. We are a population of 63 million. So I let you do the math. Then it was the wave of municipal bylaw prohibiting the burkini on French beaches. You certainly have heard about it. It was not a law, it was really a bylaw, and the Council of State deemed it illegal. And then it was prohibiting parents from wearing religious signs on school field trips, especially mother wearing a headscarf going on school trip with the kids to help teachers. There is no law about that so far, but many lawmakers try to pass amendments, right? And until now, the so-called law strengthening Republican values, which are, again, another attempt to target the Muslim population. So that's pretty much the framework that has been going on for more than 20 years now.
And Rim-Sarah, you make it a point to describe the progression of all of this, that this didn't happen, obviously, overnight, that there were steps taken to demonize and target and discriminate against the Muslim community. And some of these policies, it is hard, right, from an outsider to just call them blatantly Islamophobic, because they've been wrapped in such a way and portrayed, to target and affect all communities, when the intention behind it is to target specifically Muslim communities, like they've done in the past. They've targeted Muslim women, like you said, for the burqa. They've targeted it with the burkini as well that we saw. Rim-Sarah will continue to speak about Islamophobia in France and your experience as a French citizen. You're born and raised in France. How is the environment in France? We will speak about it right after our short break. You're watching us on Galaxy 19 satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and Apple TV. We'll be right back.
Billboards are popping up all over the country with an...
Our neighbors don't realize that Muslims are absolutely opposed to ISIS.
Salam. My name is Abdul Malik Mujahid. I'm an imam in Chicago.
16 shots! No me!
No justice!
No me!
So how do we bring up the energy which can really have an impact on the world?
You need to build bridges of understanding among people, and we need to have America moving forward.
That lesson learned brought the strength of humanity to America, which is the diversity.
Mujahid Talks, only on Muslim Network TV. Faithfully connected.
Welcome back to NextGen. I'm here with Rim-Sarah Alouane, a French legal academic and commentator. Rim-Sarah, do you feel that these policies, that France's aggressive policies against the Muslim community, have they limited diversity? Have they made the Muslim community feel insecure and perhaps unsafe in France?
I think French Muslims are first and foremost drained, to be used as scapegoat for basically government failures. We have so many things that are not going well here, especially regarding discrimination, the ghettoization of certain areas in this country, which is a product of the state, really, and even President Macron recently admitted it a couple of months ago. Yet it seemed that to cover those failures, we always try to, find a scapegoat. It's quite tactical when you think about it. But it's very interesting to see how, we keep talking about how to make a French Islam, how to integrate Muslims. Well, guess what? Islam is a French religion. French Muslims are French citizens and want to be treated as such. That's a very simple demand from Muslims here. But sadly, again, for political reasons, and usually it's to score political points, our government, and again, it's both the right wing, but also the left wing, or at least a certain part of the left, which has been conducting and putting into place this sort of policies. So, Muslims just want to live their lives, really. And unfortunately, the good old method of divide and conquer has been used and misused and overused by the French government and the different administrations. And I don't think this is sustainable in a country that is supposed to abide by its glorious motto, which is liberty, equality, and fraternity.
Sure, and as a democracy, right, we have certain expectations of France as a nation. And with that large Muslim population, right, the largest in the Western world, you have an expectation that it will treat its Muslim citizens fairly. But as a resident of France, can you tell us what the environment is like right now? You are an academic. Are you kind of, unique in the way that you think of all of these things, that you speak out? Do your counterparts and your coworkers believe the same way?
Well, a couple of things. First, it's academia, and fortunately, we have different opinions. Otherwise, there would be a serious problem if we all, think the same way and do the same thing. So, of course, different opinions is always good. But I don't think that religion per se is a good indicator to discuss that, because you also have many Muslims who side by those policies, who agreed with them, who support them, and you also have Muslims joining the far right. So again, Islam, I don't think, religion is not a good indicator. I think there is a growing worry. Unfortunately, there are divisions, of course, in academia, in law, my field. Definitely, but I think there is somehow a common agreement that civil liberties as a whole are at stake. Because, usually, what's the way we treat Muslims in this country, the way we keep, implementing new policies that target them, is a good indicator of the health of civil liberties as a whole. It starts with Muslims and then wait for the next group to come. And so far, we have been that, especially this administration has been taking many and want to implement many laws that are going to affect civil liberties, and not just Muslims. So I think we need to see the broader picture here. What happened with Muslims will happen to other people as well. And it's starting, like the law on global security, limiting a bunch of civil liberties. There is an ongoing joke in academia, a sad joke, saying that the next, chunk of professors who are going to teach civil liberties are going to teach history of law, because we have, it's more and more restricted. So I think we need to look beyond really that and see. Basically what is good for everybody. And if we do, it's in time of crisis that we need civil liberties more than ever. And unfortunately, that's not what I'm saying here. And, it's easy to target a group of people because you believe they are responsible for all the ills of the planet. But what happened when it will be your turn next?
And I think that that's a fair point, right? One minority they persecute one day and they pick another the next day. So do you think that, the French minorities need to come together? Is there unity amongst, the minorities in France, or how does that look?
Well, it's very interesting. It's a very American thing to talk about minorities. Interestingly enough, we don't recognize minorities in France because of the structure of the state and our history. Minorities do not exist. There is one people, the French people.
The French people.
Yes, we are the so-called colorblind nation. We don't see colors, which is great in theory, by the way. In theory, it's great. It's like we see you as a human that deserves protection and human rights, etc. But we all know that in practice, it doesn't work that way because we have our issues and discriminations are real and racism and our history is colonization, etc. That has not been solved. For example, we don't have statistics. Ethnic statistics based on ethnicity or race. We don't recognize race. So for many reasons that maybe I don't have time to develop, but the issue we have here is that, like I said previously, we still see Islam and Muslims, and it started with colonization, right? As incapable of integrating, quote unquote, as a foreign religion. The Muslims are a foreign group that we need to tame. Even though, like I said, Islam has became a French religion the first day the French stepped in Algeria and colonized them. I mean, ever since, but I think there is, besides all the issues regarding the state and the way they put into place certain discriminatory pieces of legislation, there is also a problem within Muslim communities, the lack of organization, the divisions, of course, and all those so-called leaders of the French Muslim leaders are not even perceived as legit by the people because they are considered as the mouth of the government, which they are. I mean, because they are a creation of the government. So I think that the same way the government needs to treat its French Muslim population like, other French men and women, French fellow men and women, the Muslims as well need to find their solution, because otherwise the state will do it for them, and they are. And I don't exactly think it's a good thing, not only for religious freedom, but also for separation of church and state.
Yeah, and if identity, right, isn't such a big thing in France, then you would also expect for them to kind of treat every person from any religion as just a normal French man, a French woman. But it seems that many of these ideas stem from, like you said, colonization, and during the colonial period, the idea of Islam being an archaic religion that can't coexist in France. But you make it a point that Islam is a French religion, that these things aren't separate. But what do you recommend to the government, to the French government? What can they do to decrease the hostility between the Muslim community and the French government and French officials?
So first of all, I would say that for a country that prides itself in being a colorblind nation, in being the nation of the Enlightenment and human rights. I have a lot to say about that, but fair enough. Right. Well, maybe to stop, putting in a separate box its French Muslim population and treat them like, again, kids that need to be educated and tamed, to treat their population as their own. Also, to stop playing the political identity card. The same way religion should not be an element, a tool for political identity, the same way the government should stop using laicity as a tool for political identity and stop playing and surfing on the wave of the far right. Because, in France, I always say that in my interviews or in my lectures, the far right might not be in power, but its spirit is. And also to make sure to finally do something regarding discrimination. whether it's religious discrimination or also, racial discrimination, which is another issue, but also very connected. I mean, it has been years since activists have been calling that out, and even analysts. And so far, very little has been done, except when elections are coming and all of a sudden they wake up, but nothing is done afterwards. And we need more than ever to really, discuss what country we want to be. What, in today's world, in a hyper global connected world, what country are we? I think we are not facing a crisis of secularism or whatsoever. I think we are facing a crisis of identity. The fact that French Muslims are fully French, and yes, they are another voice among others. And that's something that for our political elite, that is still unacceptable. Again, because we haven't reconciled with our past, our really heavy past. So I do believe in France. I do believe in its potential. But right now, there is a part of the population that we still deemed, unworthy of being French, even though they are. And for me, that's unacceptable. And as a French citizen, that's something I cannot accept like that.
And that's completely understandable, right, Rim-Sarah? You speak about how France, as a nation, it does have hope to be better, but it needs to reconcile with its past first and listen to the voices, hopefully, of its Frenchmen, of the Muslims who want to contribute, hopefully, to the state. Thank you so much. I know that it is late in France right now. I appreciate you for being here on our time, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all.
Thank you so much for having me, Salam alaikum.